Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session. My name is Andrea Santolalla. I'm a managing partner in the technology and innovation practice within Allianz Consulting and the head of Allianz Services in Spain. I'll be your moderator this afternoon for what I think is a very timely topic, the COO Compass. Our industry is being reshaped and transformed by structural forces. AI is now ubiquitous. We have a talent model that is consistently evolving at lightning speed. Globalization is being reconsidered. Is it still good to offshore, nearshore? Do we see the same value? And lastly, but not least, client expectations continue to shift in real time. They not only want to be provided with great service, but they want to be delighted. And COOs really sit at the vortex of this disruption and this transformation. We're really privileged today to have with us a global panel of experienced leaders who are actively shaping the future of operations in different ways. I'll give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves in a few words, names and titles, so that we can move on to the meat and potatoes of the conversation. Tom.
Very good. Thanks. I'm Tom Wilde, the CEO of Indico Data. Indico is an intake and orchestration solution focused primarily on the commercial and specialty markets, helping our customers really deal with that border between the customer and all of the processes that support them, from underwriting to claims to policy servicing to billing.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Louise Marling. I'm the COO of Gallagher in the UK. We help companies manage their balance sheets. I'm relatively new to the broking and the reinsurance world, but I've spent 30 years in insurance operations. I was COO at Hiscox, and I spent a long career at Aviva.
Thomas Kuhnt. I'm the COO and CIO of HDI Global. We write corporate and specialty business across 22 markets, roughly 10 billion in premiums.
My name is Jörg Bertogg. I'm the COO for Zurich Commercial Insurance globally, responsible for AI, multinational, analytics, and IT. Before, I was leading several European commercial insurance markets.
Thank you, panel. And I've been told you will be able to ask questions via a Slido QR code on the screen, so please do ask as we speak. Tom, I'm going to start with you. I know that you're really interested in AI-driven models, and I guess the reality is that now AI isn't something that COOs opt into. Increasingly, it's arriving by design, by default, in the platforms that we buy, in the workflow tools that we use, in the productivity suites that we acquire. So transformation is now driven from within the tech stack instead of from top-down transformation programs. How do you see this shift, this AI arriving by default? How is it changing how COOs act? And then a question within a question. Do you agree with the statement, which I've heard a few times since Claude Code was released, that software as a service is now dead?
Yeah, lots to unpack there. I think that a few different things. We were talking before the panel time here that even think about a year ago at this show, and the conversation was much more about when should we really lean into AI, where is it going to have the biggest impact, and even in the last 3 months, obviously now it's mandatory, it's urgent, and transformational, and who knows where we will be a year from now. So I think that the urgency has increased quite a bit. I think that what I observe in talking to customers is how critical the COO-CIO partnership is now. I mean, it's always been there for sure. You can't operate these businesses without technology, and the technology doesn't work without the operations focus. But that partnership now is absolutely critical. I've even noticed, in the last few engagements we've had, that it's quite often that the COO and CIO are together in the room during the pilot readout or whatever the engagement looks like. So that's different than it was, I'd say, even a year ago. That is a critical partnership that's changed. I think that in terms of is software dead, is SaaS dead, the question is not so much can we build this, because the answer now is probably yes, right? I mean, I think that's the biggest change is that's probably a yes to almost any question involving software today. It's really, should we build this? Where can you most impact the customer experience, combined with where can you create true differentiation? So there's a category of things that you probably should build. There's many categories of things that you absolutely should not build. And because I've yet to meet an insurance company that really has the product focus and the sort of ability to sustain that focus to build scalable software, secure software, explainable software. So I think those are some of the factors that come in.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for that technology-driven view. Louise, you and I know each other from Hiscox, and I know it's always been really important to you, that intersection between relationship, trust, and expertise. Now that's getting a little bit jolted by all of the automation that we're seeing and this pace of acceleration. As automation increases, how do you ensure that the customer experience becomes more human, not less?
I think that's a really interesting question, and it's one that gets frequently overlooked because the narrative around automation often focuses on efficiency, and it's easy to lose sight of the people, both the customers and the colleagues, that need to interact with this technology on a day-to-day basis. And I think tech-led automation can very quickly make the customer experience feel cold, transactional, impersonal, and inhuman. So how do we ensure that doesn't happen? I think we need to start with the customer at point of design. So what are the customer pain points? And we need to consider the customer's emotional journey at different points throughout their life cycle and their interaction with the organization. So we should think about using automation to reduce friction through customer journeys. So how do we make things faster, simpler, more predictable? And we should make sure that they have access to a human at moments of stress or de-stress, and make sure that the process does enable that. I think the other really important thing is to use automation to take work away from customers. Historically, when we look at some of the poor online journey design, repetitive forms, chatbot doom loops, it feels like we've actually pushed work onto customers with automation. So how can we remove that? How can we ensure that if the customer tells us something, they only have to tell us once? How can we make it really seamless if a customer wishes to flip between an online and an offline journey? And I think really importantly, we should give customers choice between whether they self-serve or whether they speak to a human. I think the corollary to this as well is taking work away from our colleagues, so automating the administrative work and also using automation to remove some of the cognitive burden from our colleagues when they're interacting with our customers, so that they can be really emotionally present and tuned in rather than having part of their brain thinking, oh, I've got to take call notes. I think that's a real advantage to automation. And I think if we bring this together in the right way, we can make sure then that crucially we involve humans at times when we need empathy. I think nuanced judgment is when, or complexity, that's when we really should make sure that a human can get involved. A claim involving distress and complexity shouldn't be left to a bot. That's when people really come into their own, being warm, empathetic, reassuring, and really helping the customer through times of stress. That's what we're here for. And I think then beyond that, we need to look at how do we train our people? So are we equipping them to have those conversations? Are we giving them listening skills? Are we giving them advice-giving skills so that they can better support the customer? And I also think we should look at how we measure the effect of automation, because again, it's very easy to get tied up in transactional costs. That tends to be where we all focus, but we should also make sure we're looking at our customer metrics. So how do our customers feel about this automation? Is it working for them or not? And I think if we do that and do that well and put the customer at the heart of the design, then that's how we ensure that the customer experience becomes more rather than less human.
So operational efficiency should not trump the human experience.
No.
They're not mutually exclusive.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all. I think if you do it well, then they can support one another really well.
Thank you, Louise. Thomas, I'm going to go to you next. You bring a really broad view of how incumbents and challengers operate. We all know that challengers move with really fast speed, and sometimes incumbents are accused of being too slow. But there are new complexities with growing fast and with scaling fast. So what is one thing that incumbents could learn from digital challengers? And what is one of those challenges that is often underestimated when you try to scale?
Yeah, there are many days in my reality where I wish that I was a challenger, because we are 100 years old and it's legacy everywhere, right? You have legacy on the tech side. You have also legacy in the heads of people of, hey, I've always worked that way. So what I would love our organization to adopt more is a real radical greenfield redesign, which is pretty tough if you only know a certain way of working. That's what I like about challengers also walking around here. If I look at their architectures, it's all so clean and nice and simple. And you always look at it and says, yes, if I was a greenfield, that's exactly how to do it. And I think, and also rewiring the complete operating model, not just treating AI as a tool that takes a single step and replaces it with AI, but really thinking about how does an AI-driven operating model look like end to end, really looking at the whole domain and starting from scratch, which I think is much easier for a lot of the challengers, much harder for an incumbent. Now, I think, then I always smile at the challenger saying, hey, wait till you grow up, then you will at some point arrive in my reality. Whereas the don't, I think, is more scaling is messy, no matter what. I mean, today's greenfield approach will be tomorrow's legacy. And I think the moment you start scaling, let be across geographies, lines of business, you will hit complexity. And I think for challengers, it often feels like, oh, governance, risk control, documentation, a lot of those control things feel like, oh, that's all a burden. But I think the moment you start to scale and really have volume at scale on your platform, you realize that that's really an important feature and not overhead. I think that's the one advice I would give for challengers. Of course, it's always difficult to find the right time when to invest in those capabilities, but I think if you really want to scale successfully, you also have to think about when things don't work the way you intended to work, how do you do governance risk control around it? So that's the one advice I would give.
Thank you. That was a bipartisan response, so you didn't take sides. That's really good. Jörg, I want to touch on the topic of global versus local with you. Zurich operates globally across several different markets, diverse regulatory requirements, and customer environments. The question of what to standardize globally and what to preserve locally, that flexibility, is a critical COO decision. How do you determine what should be standardized globally versus what should remain that flexible and local touch?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in commercial insurance, generally, I think it's for all the carriers, there is a huge opportunity to standardize, to scale globally. And why? It's, our proposition is tailor-made, individual for each customer. So that's why we can have really global capabilities. We can deploy them to the multinational customers, to the large domestic or even mid-market, global capabilities. That's different when you look at the retail market, slightly different. Let's say a motor product in Brazil, in, let's say, Switzerland and UK. Products, regulation, processes are quite different. But when you go to commercial insurance, let's say an example, having a factory in Chile or in Germany, I wanna buy cyber cover. The process of risk assessment, pricing, everything, this is standardized across. Cyber does also not stick to borders, country borders. Cyber is globally. So that's why I think really it's a huge opportunity to have global systems. And for example, global portals, global CRM system, global pricing system, global workflow system, that's all then really deployed globally. And now it comes really with AI. That's now the huge opportunity. We have AI and we can build it into the global systems. Not every country needs to do their own AI cases, so we can really scale AI. Of course, it's in every step of our value chain. And we need to have responsible AI, it needs to be transparent, it needs also be very clear in the commercial business. I think the underwriter is doing the decision, but he gets much, much better tools with AI. He gets better equipped.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Jörg. Louise, I'd like to go back to something that I think you made a point on during your answer. There's an opportunity here to really focus on human judgment adding value, maybe in a disproportionate way to the journey, to the client experience, to the customer journey. Where do you see those areas of opportunity being right now?
I think it's when things get very complicated and messy. I think currently AI models can sometimes fail to deal with the nuance of that conversation or that question, and people tend to be very good at picking up on that. I think it's when the customer is feeling stressed or de-stressed or in any way vulnerable. And I think particularly in a post-consumer duty world, it's really important that we give customers who are feeling vulnerable at any point in that journey the opportunity to speak to somebody. And again, that can have a really disproportionate effect in terms of providing reassurance, help, signposting, doing all of those good things to take care of the customer and really to understand those wants and needs. And I think it's maybe the nano pause after somebody said, oh, could you find a way of making my premium cheaper? And somebody says, yes, I can increase your excess. And then you get the nano pause and you're like, A, do you understand? So I need to re-go over what that means again. And B, actually, are you now worried about the potential financial impacts of that? People are really good at hearing that, especially if you give them the time, the headspace to do it and tuning in. And I think that's where they can really help. And I think the other point is, we always think about distressing claims and the kind of bad side. Sometimes our customers want to share really great things in their lives. And again, people are really good at responding to that in the moment. I had a dear friend got engaged recently. Her and her to-be husband bought this beautiful ring, and they showed it to me. And of course, being the cheery insurance soul that I am, I immediately said, is that insured? And it turned out she'd bust through her single item limit on her policy. So no, she wasn't. So she rang her insurer and she said, the first thing out of the mouth of the person she spoke to was, oh, congratulations, I'm so happy for you. And in terms of loyalty and how she feels about that organisation, that's really important. It was a huge thing in her life and that got recognised and she felt human. She felt like an individual and that she mattered. And I think that's still very difficult to do without people being involved.
Thank you for that. And I think a question for the panel while we're on this subject of being human. A lot of the reports that we're seeing coming out with the mass rollout of AI is that consulting firms are taking the opportunity to potentially slow the recruitment at the lower levels of the organization, perhaps at the junior consultant level, because they feel that those are roles that can be now taken over by AI. But there's also this paradox that those entry-level roles are usually performed by younger people within the industry or society who are very tech-savvy and probably very heavy adopters of AI technologies on a personal and potentially a professional level. How do you see this paradox to any of you?
I mean, I think there's been a common concern of the sort of graying of the insurance industry for a while now, and that experience, leaves the building at some point. But at the same time, I've seen experiences on your point about adoption where they can be the sort of more experienced workers also can be the most resistant to adopting new workflows, new methods, new technologies. So it's definitely a paradox. Longer term, it's quite concerning to think that we won't have any entry-level people because those people won't become experienced people. So I think there's some maybe short-term reaction that has to be metered by the kind of longer-term thinking about what the workforce looks like 20 years from now, not 2 years from now.
And another question for all of you, are you seeing AI being adopted at the board level of your organizations?
We actually do board level AI sessions. So we do that every board session. We do have an AI espresso, as we call it, where we have somebody from the organization showing a case that works well. But we also share our experience over the last 4 weeks on, hey, how and where have we used AI? Has it worked? Has it not worked? So we try to make that part of the dialogues. Arguably, I think the younger, the people entering the company are much more embracing some of it. So I do think it's not correlated to his age purely, but we do see a gap that if you go down the management ranks, that adoption levels are the highest with entry-level people joining the organization. They grow up with the technology, and it's harder and harder for established people to really embrace the opportunities of AI.
Thank you. I'd like to direct the panel to a question on the screen. I have various questions, but this one caught my eye. I think one of the things that I enjoyed most of being a COO was talking to the business, sitting with the underwriters, sitting with the claims team. The question is, how often are you engaging non-C-suite employees to really understand how they work and the systems that they're using in their day-to-day?
I'll pick that up. So I do that regularly. I think it's really important because otherwise you don't really know what's going on. You can have some really insightful conversations talking to people who are using the client servicing system, whatever system it is, on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes you realize they're struggling with things that A, you didn't know about, and B, that sometimes can be easily fixed. And some of it is encouraging them to report bugs and issues because it's always been like that. So why should I report it? Well, if you report it, we know about it and we can fix it and we can do something about it. But I think it's understanding where they're using systems poorly and they need training. And that particularly then impacts data quality, which is essential, particularly in an AI-driven world. If our data's not right, then we're building on foundations of sand. So I find those conversations really, really helpful, personally.
And I think it's important when you have AI, you cannot give, for example, AI to a department and then say, you drive now AI. That does not work.
Figure it out. Yes.
Exactly. You need to go, really, I think it's the employees, it's the people on the ground. We need to create these, you can call them X teams or whatever, where you have different expertise, you bring them together. That's been junior people, more senior people, more with a tech background, and then you create these AI cases. And the hierarchy does definitely not work here if you really want to drive it.
Yeah, I think the change management piece is probably the biggest failure mode. If you haven't thought through the change management planning, rolling out anything, technology or product related, that's a huge weakness. I think that isolated projects that are only being driven by a specific stack or persona within the organization are at high risk because all of these things are connected across functions, and so that change management becomes critical.
Thomas, I'd like to ask you a question. I think there's a perception that, as I mentioned, incumbents are slow. And I want to understand if you think that's fair or not, because we can't deny that a lot of investment goes into the upgrading of our technology, our legacy systems, our policy administration systems, our claim systems. So it's not for lack of wanting or trying, but yet that reputation is still there. Is it fair or not?
I think it depends on what you look at. I think historically, if you look at enterprise IT, there are a lot of things that just make enterprise IT very slow. Because if you have scaled organization, like Jörg talked about, if you share a system across many countries, if you break something, that will significantly impact operations. So there's a lot of reasons why it's a bit slower. I think AI is different. That's why in my CIO role, I really like AI, because it's much faster to deploy. Because how does our reality look like? My normal process of my people starts in Outlook. Right? In the corporate commercial world, we just get emails from brokers with a lot of documents. From a tech perspective, it's so much easier to now connect AI agents with Outlook because, well, if you're on the cloud, you just can directly ingest that information, process it. And the only moment when you have to start touching your legacy is once you've done the quotation, once the broker has agreed to that deal, right? Then you need to figure out a way to book that into your legacy world. So I do think that AI for us is a great opportunity to demonstrate that tech can also move fast, also in a large corporate organization. It's very different from core system replacements, which are always a nightmare from a CEO perspective, because it takes years to replace a core system. AI is different, and we are showing that we can move much faster. Also exactly in those integrated teams, get the business, the data scientists together, let them work together. They can really make magic happen much faster than in the past.
Thank you. This is a very related question. So as the allocator of resources, the people who are owners of the P&L and hold the budget, how are you allocating funding to AI initiatives? Do you have governance structures within your organization? And I heard in a different panel earlier today that governance and steercos are the place you go to kill innovation, right? So how are you working towards decisions around funding? How are you maybe rewiring that operating model?
So we have kind of a 3-pillar strategy. And the first one is really innovate, try. We should not set a lot of boundaries. Really, we should have, as we said before, our employee have idea for a solution, and then they should try to create AI. But then comes really which solution we can scale. Because what we cannot do is really that we have many different use cases, AI use cases. Our people need to go out of their systems, go into this system. We need to integrate them. And that's exactly, we need to find criteria, which one we can scale globally. And I think that's really, in the first phase, trial and error, but then really assess it and look, at the end, it's ROI, return on investment, value. We need to deliver business value.
And does the panel find that calculation of the return on investment something easy? Is there a magic formula that the rest of the industry hasn't found, or is it still trial and error?
I mean, I think you have to start with the end result you're trying to create. And I think that a lot of times these projects start being overly prescriptive in terms of, these are the tools we want to use, this is the technology we want to use, but that's actually not the challenge. The challenge is, have you clearly defined the outcome you're trying to achieve, work backwards. Obviously, this sounds obvious, but it's hard in practice, right? Which is why it's a step that gets skipped. Really nail down that outcome you're trying to drive, so now you can measure against that very explicitly, and then hold the teams and your vendor partners accountable. Like, this is success. If we don't hit this project won't go forward.
Tom, tell me a little bit about, we were discussing with Jörg, not stifling, right? Trying it out, letting it be innovative within the organization, and then as it matures, maybe starting to apply a little bit of control. How should COOs think about governance when it comes to AI, to keep that nimbleness, to keep the flexibility, so as not to kill it, but at the same time, not make it completely a discrete initiative?
I mean, it's a little bit strange when you think about it. We suddenly have all gotten very enamored of a tool that is fundamentally stochastic, fundamentally probabilistic in nature. And in insurance, ultimately it has to become as deterministic as possible, because you're trying to figure out, what price should I set for this risk? Should I adjudicate this claim? And so now trying to map between something that is probabilistic and will give you different outcomes virtually almost every time you ask it, and trying to nail that down to reliable outcomes is the challenge. On a regulatory standpoint, it becomes even more challenging, because as a regulator shows up and says, you're using AI to make these decisions, I'd like to know all of the provenance of this decision. Can you show me that? And when we think about, there's a lot of inputs to that now. What model did I use? What prompt? Who wrote the prompt? Who was allowed to edit the prompt? What documents were used? Where did that data come from? There's a lot to maintain state around, so that you can report against that, but also go back in time and realize, okay, here's where it's going off the rails. Here's how we're going to fix that. So I think the governance piece is really the next big wave to come, as we've put these probabilistic technologies into place, where historically we've used software is very deterministic, right? If you write a rule in software, it will execute that every single time the same way.
Thank you, Tom. I started the first half of my career in the second line, focused on operational risk, so I love this question. What scares you the most? I used to ask people, what keeps you up at night? What have companies missed from AI adoption that we should really be looking at and maybe aren't as an industry? Any takers?
I think I talked about that a little bit last year. As a CEO or a CIO, it's very hard to decide when to double down on something. Right? Because you don't want to be the guy who wasted hundreds of millions on something that was a hype and never became reality.
Bad reputation, right?
Bad reputation. But you also don't want to be the guy who missed the one thing of the century, and your company is really struggling because you didn't adopt the technology that really changed the world. Right? And if you're longer in the business, you've seen many technologies come and go, and it's always very hard to decide, hey, when do you really double down on it? And I love to connect that with the question from before. What we've decided is, hey, AI, that could be so real that we have allocated separate funding on top of the normal budgets to give it a chance or give it a try. And I pitched that more like our life insurance policy to the board, right? Because if you take it from a risk perspective, hey, yes, we might have wasted a bit of money, but the downside is limited by that budget, right? But if we miss the train on this trend, I think we could be out of business, because I do think that the companies that adopt that quickly will have an advantage. And this is a technology where it's much harder to catch up. So we often had this, oh, let's be a fast follower. I think if you look at the foundations of this change that's happening, how it impacts people, processes, technology, it will be very hard to be a fast follower, because I'm not so sure whether you can still really catch up with companies that have moved aggressively. And that's my key concern. Are we too slow adopting the technology, or are we going too fast, trying to chase a hype that might not be as real and not ripe for operations yet?
And I guess related to that, and Jörg, maybe you can answer this for me. There's potentially a belief that the challengers and the incumbents, they have maybe completely different profiles, right, in terms of skill sets, in terms of capability, but operating on a global and a local context. Do you see that being real? Is that true, that the challengers and the disruptors to our industry, who claim to have AI in everything they sell and everything they do, are really that much different in terms of the population of their teams to the people in the incumbents, the large organizations that are proven to be successful over time?
I think we need to take both from the challenger and the incumbents the best, and combine it. Yes, they might be more agile, faster, even latest technology, but on the other hand, the incumbents or the traditional, they understand the complexity. They also have the knowledge end to end, and I think really combining this, that's really the knowledge, that's the key. That's why, for example, in Zurich, we have done the biggest AI agentic hackathon in the financial service industry, where we brought 1,000 people, 40 countries, 4 weeks to build agentic AI to solve business problems. And now we work really together. They're really fast. It was incredible. But now we need to incorporate the best ones into our complexity. And I think together we are then really strong.
And I asked you that question to tee up this one here. If you had to build a new insurance company from scratch today, with limited budget, by the way, what would you do fundamentally different across the operations setup because AI exists today? That's a good one.
That's a good one.
So we can think about it from a people, from a process, from a data, from a system perspective.
Go ahead.
I would say commercial insurance is very much a people knowledge business, and if you would need to scratch it, to build it from the scratch, that's probably a little bit different from retail. In retail you would really start to build the machine and all this. I think in commercial you would really have the knowledge, deep knowledge, and people you need to have them underwriting, resilient solution claims, and so on, and you would then really combine it with technology. But you need to start from the beginning on bringing both together. It's not enough to answer the question to create the machine. It's much more. It's machine. It's system, process, people. Very much in the commercial.
Louise?
And I think I would start from the customer. I think, again, as an industry, we tend to focus on underwriting and pricing models. And I think if we start with customer need and build from there, and I completely agree with what you say, I think depending on the nature of the customer, the nature of the product, then would determine what you did subsequently to that.
Tom, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think as a corollary too, even maybe not starting with in absence of the customer experience, but also the employee experience. I think that a lot of times in the companies we work with, these companies have been assembled through M&A. There's been systems that are 30 years old, 10 years old, 5 years old. And when you kind of look through the eyes of the employee, it can be really challenging to navigate all the different systems and processes and workflows. So, starting from scratch, you'd have an ability to say, let's think about how we get this task done most efficiently, which right now is often hindered just because of real legacy challenges.
I'm getting some really great questions, and I'm picking the most provocative ones just to stump our panel. So we'll do one more question because we're running out of time, and then we'll go to final thoughts. Is AI changing how you think about the top team roles within the organization and their scope? So COO, CIO, and I'd add on to that CEO, CUO, CFO. What are your thoughts?
I think it has to. AI changes the speed and velocity of decision making. It changes how teams work, how teams are structured. And I think some of the traditional management roles around controlling flows of information and creating structure and passing information from here to there go in this new world. So, but what doesn't change is the importance of strategy, the importance of culture, and Tom spoke very eloquently about why change fails, that whole communication, internal politics, resolving all of that. So those roles remain really vital. If your strategy is poor, I think AI may just see the end even quicker. And similarly, it's not going to fix cultural drift. So I think that's where then the C-suite really do need to focus their attention, whilst making sure then the organisation is equipped to work effectively together in a different way to enable AI solutions.
Thank you, Jörg.
I think especially senior leaders like you have here, CEOs, CCO, whatever, we all need to get AI fit. That means really we need to understand also how models are working, what different models are, because otherwise how can you then decide what to deploy? You know, it's not. I think it's not enough just to use a little bit AI as senior leader. We need really to be the role model and really go into it. AI fit.
I think before we go to call to actions, because we're running out of time, I'm going to summarize a few of the reflection points we've touched on today. So, AI becoming embedded everywhere. It makes the value orchestration and the capability building for the COO very important. Automation should elevate human empathy, judgment, and design, not obstruct it. Incumbents and challengers have a symbiotic relationship, and there's probably more opportunity to leverage from that relationship in the future. And finally, resilient operations must continue to balance that global consistency with the local needs in a harmonious way. To wrap up, I'd like to ask the panel one last question, and I'd like to ask them to offer in a few words a call to action for the COOs in the room, the head of operations in the room, the operations managers in the room, to help steer them and their organizations in this brave new world. What is the one thing COOs should do next? Why don't we start with you, Jörg?
So the one thing is really pace. AI gets real. Scale it and do not forget adoption. You can have the best solution. Do not forget your employee. Adopt. Focus on them.
So bring them on the journey.
Exactly.
Thomas, what about you?
I think move away from just thinking about ops. I think no two CEOs have the same remit exactly, because how we define ops is so different. So really rewire your organization, discuss with underwriting claims, how do we redesign the organization, and start today. And I fully agree with get your hands dirty. If you want to learn how to ride a horse, you don't read a book, right? If you want to steer AI, you have to use AI.
Louise?
And I'd build on that. I'd say engage. So really understand, don't leave, if you have AI models running in your organization, don't just leave it to IT. You need to understand what they are, what they're doing, and how they're being governed. And engage with your teams to understand where are future use cases and get them thinking about it and bringing their ideas, because that's what's going to generate adoption and generate change in your organization.
Thank you. And Tom?
I would say a year from now, get ready for the fact that your workforce is going to explode, not in the way you think. You'll have hundreds or thousands of agents who are now on the team, AI agents. Is your team ready to manage them? Are you ready to manage them? Is the board ready to manage them? Because in a year from now, that's going to be the case for sure.
Thank you. That concludes our time today. Thanks to the audience and the panel for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the conference.